Hi, Tashidala everyone, and welcome back to Tibet Talks. We are very sorry about the delay in getting this episode started. Unfortunately, we had some last-second technical difficulties. We were so grateful that we can finally be live online with all of you now. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I'm Ashwin Verghese, Communications Officer of the International Campaign for Tibet, and I'm joined today by my two ICT colleagues, our ICT President, Tencho Getzo, and our Government Relations Director, Franz Matzner, both of whom just returned from Europe. So we're very grateful to both of them for being with us here today. And we'd also like to say thank you to all of you who are joining us live today on our website or our social media channels. We want you to be part of this discussion too. This is going to be an interactive conversation. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act, better known as the Resolve Tibet Act. Now, many of you watching or listening to this probably know that the Resolve Tibet Act recently had a breakthrough in the US Congress. But you might still have questions about what does this mean, where does the bill go from here, or any other questions that you can think of. And we encourage you to send those questions to us during today's show. I will be monitoring your questions, so please send them in by emailing comments@savetibet.org or posting them in the comments section of our Facebook Live post. I'll be keeping an eye on your questions as they come in, and I'll be sharing them throughout the discussion with Tenchala and Franz. So please send those questions in. So we'll start that discussion in just a moment, but first of all, many of you probably have seen the very disturbing news coming out of Derge County in Tibet, where, according to reports, Chinese authorities have arrested over 1,000 Tibetans for peacefully protesting against a dam project that would force 2,000 Tibetans to relocate from their villages and lead to the destruction of several Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, including several centuries-old religious murals. So Tenchala, to get started here today, as ICT's president, I know you'd like to comment on that. So let me turn it over to you for that.
Yes, thank you, Ashwin. Just as as you mentioned, Franz and I, we were in Brussels at a meeting of Tibet support groups organized by the Central Tibetan Administration. It was right on the beginning of the second day that we saw the footage of the Tibetans peacefully protesting Chinese authorities. This is a sign of not just Derge County, but all across the Tibetan plateau, how much little space there is for Tibetans and Tibetan voices to be heard. Here you are seeing monks, lay people, men, women, older women, on their knees and begging for authorities to hear their voices. And over 1,000 of them have been arrested with I was reading reports where they were being told to bring bedding and food as they're being arrested. So we are monitoring the situation as best as we can. We are also looking at gathering more information on the monasteries that are within that space that would be destroyed. These are 13th century monasteries there. So we're very concerned. Our colleagues have been raising these with UN authorities as well as here in the United States. We're talking to our congressional leaders also on what to do about this situation there.
I would only add that two things. One is that not only are the monasteries at stake, but the dam building process itself would flood areas and force the people who live there out of their homes, all in the name of building this dam, which can also lead to many negative impacts on people downstream. So not only is the self-determination of the Tibetan people being infringed upon directly, but when one considers the downstream impacts, the self-determination of many people who are relying on the streams themselves is also being taken away. So just as an example of how little the Chinese authorities really care about any of the rights, both internally Tibet and downstream.
Yeah, and we're very much concerned for the people who have been arrested. and also for the people who have been sharing these videos with us, with the outside world. There have been instances where they will receive severe repercussions for their actions. So we are watching with grave concern. But as we're doing that, we have also the Resolve Tibet bill, and that's what we're here to talk about. So, Franz, for our listeners, tell us, what is the status of the bill right now, and what needs to happen for this to become law?
Sure. I'm aware that most of our community of compassion has been following the legislation from its introduction until now, this great news. But just in case that people need a little touch up on what the bill does, I'll just summarize that really quickly. There's three really important pillars to the legislation, and the first is very simple but very important from an international perspective, and that is to simply acknowledge that Tibetan people are a distinct people with their own heritage, culture, language, and that's been there since ancient times, despite what the Chinese propaganda might say. The second piece is in order to continue to put pressure on the PRC to come to the table to continue negotiations, it establishes very firmly that the United States position is that this is not resolved, that the issue needs to be resolved in a peaceful, mutually beneficial way. And then the third piece of it, which in today's time with so much authoritarian and cyber spying going on and disinformation, is it really empowers the U.S. government, specifically the Special Coordinator's Office, to directly and consistently combat that disinformation. And as we know, there's many, many instances going on of China's long arm reaching even across into the United States soil. So this is a key provision as well.
Yes, so with that, this bill right now passed the House floor with bipartisan majority. What does that mean, and where does it have to go now? What is the
certainly
steps?
Right. So to underscore that, it wasn't just bipartisan support; it's overwhelming bipartisan support. The Tibetan issue has always received bipartisan support, the United States administrations and Congress. So we're very hopeful of the next step. So technically, the next thing that has to happen is it's going over to the Senate. The piece of legislation was introduced bipartisan by Senators Merkley and Senator Young. And the next step is for that piece of legislation to go into the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that's where all foreign relations bills of topics go through. And just like it happened in the House, there'll need to be, a markup or also consideration of that legislation, and then to get it out of the committee and then voted on by the whole Senate, so it can go to the president's desk and become law.
So for members who are listening and who want to be supportive of this bill, what can people do?
The same as we said for the House bill, and we're grateful for all the support. It wouldn't have gotten over the finish line in the House without it. Click and take part of ICT's petition campaign, which can be found on social media, on our website, and that will send these petitions directly to your senator, expressing your dedication to getting this thing passed. That is just one option. However, there's always more. One is to make your own phone calls directly to your Senate offices. You can write in. Petitions are good. We encourage you to use it, but good old-fashioned pen and paper carries a lot of weight. So feel free to, write a letter or a postcard and send it in to your Senate's office. They really do pay attention to this, because when they hear from their constituents in that way, postcard and handwriting is worth a whole lot. So I encourage everybody to take those steps. Feel free to call over and over and over again. They do log these phone calls. They have that again, that has a big impact. So that's just 2 or 3 ways that you can take action.
Yep. Like Franz said, members' actions make a difference. And these actions will also be joined by Tibetans and Tibet supporters here, because March 11th and 12th we have our Tibet Lobby Days, and we have over 170 people registered this year for our Tibet Lobby Day. We're excited about that. How is the preparations going for that, Franz? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, this is building. This speaks to the incredible momentum that this legislation already has. I believe that this is maybe one of the largest, most engaged lobby days we've seen. So we recognize that this bill. Everyone recognizes how important this bill is for Tibetans, Tibetan Americans, and Tibet supporters all over the world. All eyes essentially are on the bill. So the preparations for the lobby day are going quite well. As I said, we keep getting more and more registrations, so let's see. We're starting to get the meetings set with all of the offices, and again, I'll underscore that it's those personal contacts from constituents that really move legislators. So even if you can't come to Washington to participate directly in Lobby Day, during the period of time of Lobby Day is a good time to take all the actions we just mentioned, as it really, again, will build on itself. So I think that we'll see more materials and explanations of what's happening over Lobby Day over the next couple days. And the number one issue is going to be the Resolve Tibet Act.
So can you put also the Resolve Tibet Act into a little bit of context, because our members have probably know the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act was passed in 2018, then the Tibet Policy and Support Act of 2020 was passed after that. How does this work in it with those? How do you explain all these different acts? Can you give
I'll try.
Yes.
All of them combined speak to that bipartisan support and investment in the Tibetan people and their rights, and each of them kind of addresses different aspects of that. So the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act addresses the imbalance between the Chinese authorities, people, media, whomsoever, ability to freely come to the United States and, see, witness, engage with our society in an open way. In contrast, as people might guess, the Chinese have pretty much locked off Tibet behind an iron curtain. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out, information doesn't come out. And so the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act is designed to put sanctions on the blockage. So officials who are actively keeping Tibetans out, or journalists or whomsoever, have to be held accountable for that. And then the other legislation you mentioned was address a broader scope. It once again, reiterated the U.S. policies of support for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for negotiations, and I think a key piece is that it established designated a special office within the State Department and a special coordinator on Tibet, so who has the mandate to focus on negotiations and other aspects of Tibet policy. So this really, once again, solidifies, how important this is to our foreign policy. It has a couple of other provisions that, from again, looking at environmental impacts, religious suppression. And so it is an update from some of the previous legislation to have a stronger scope on so many different issues that are impacted by what the Chinese authorities are doing in and on and to the Tibetan people and the Tibetan Plateau. And so in that context, what about the Resolve Tibet Act, right? So when I talk about it, I often use an analogy to just a computer. Every once in a while, right, we all know this, you have to put a patch into the program. Things have changed and you have to add something or adjust something to what's happening now. And essentially, the Resolve Tibet Act does that. It makes more concrete and long-lasting the U.S. support of not just His Holiness, but also the entire historical institution going back and looking forward. So it becomes clear that no matter what happens, the United States will never, give up its support. It's not time bound. And the second piece is, again, what we've talked about. It takes this next step in directly countering disinformation, which has become a more significant issue since the first bill passed.
And I think you'll agree, just as we were there in Brussels for the International Tibet Support Group with over 170 participants from 42 countries, we felt how people see this bill and how important this is for the movement, for this passage, and then the energy that people want to take this on and take this work into different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll admit that I was surprised. We focus on what's happening to move a piece of legislation through Congress. That's my job, right? Is what can I do to get this bill passed and work with the administration? And we often said that this is important to Tibetan people all around the world and inside Tibet, a sign of hope. To see that reflected from people all over the world at different ages, countries that you might not even guess, right? Argentina, you name it. We saw this outpouring of support and joy in that it's even gotten this far. So in one way, the world's eyes are on what happens in this legislation, and people are waiting with bated breath to see it become law for their own advances in their own countries. So you can have one anecdote, I won't say what country, saying, we're waiting so that we can take this legislation as a passed piece of legislation and hold it up to our administration and legislator and say, well, see, it can be done. So it's a big opportunity, and I think it's exciting.
Thank you, Franz. Thank you, Franz. Thank you, Tencho. Great conversation so far, and we are starting to get some questions coming in through our social media channels. So once again, a reminder, and also for any of you who have just joined the program, please send your questions to us about the Resolve Tibet Act by emailing comments@savetibet.org or by posting them in the comment section of our Facebook Live post. So let me share the first question we received so far, and this is from a Facebook user named David Patterson. David, thank you for your question. David writes, can President Biden be contacted during Lobby Day with the Resolve Tibet bill and make a statement on behalf of the Tibet people? So that's David's question, and I will pass that on to the two of you.
Well, certainly, his office, the administration is, always accessible by comment, and it's the same. It's the same as reaching out to your representatives. The administration should know about our support and your support for Tibet and the bill. Of course, it's the executive branch, and they don't make legislation. It's Congress, so we're going to target and keep our eye on that. But it's important to raise the voice of Tibet wherever and however you can.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you, Franz, for that answer. We have another question here. It came in from Barry Cox. Barry, thanks for your question as well. Barry writes, what do you expect to be the biggest challenges to passage in the Senate? Other crises or priorities that the Senate has to deal with? Election year gridlock? Something else? Franz, Tencho, would you like to weigh in on this possibly challenging question?
It's hard to not say all of the above, and also not to sound like you're being a little glib when saying that, because that is something that legislation like this, particularly legislation in an odd way that is non-controversial, that is bipartisan, sometimes faces difficulty, as you just mentioned, Barry, simply because finding time in the Senate is extremely difficult. It's become more and more difficult to get the Senate to, frankly, vote on anything. So I think that, as you said, the other crises happening around the world are definitely they're important, but they shouldn't stand in the way of making progress on something that can not only help the Tibetan people, but I think in a direct way point to solutions. Right, the Tibetan people have demonstrated incredible resistance to oppression in a peaceful manner. And the overall message of hope and possibility and peace is certainly something the world could use right now.
I'll agree to that also. And then I think the House, having passed this bill with overwhelming majority, is a good, it sends this to the Senate, a strong message that there is bipartisan support at an overwhelming level. So we're off on a good footing, good start,
Absolutely.
and we're having lobby day over here with almost 170 people. That's a good start. We have now our members who will engage on it also and engage their members of Congress on the Senate side. That's also a good thing. I think it takes all of us to push in small ways and big ways together for this pass. And we also have leadership in the House and Congress who have been steadfast in supporting Tibet and sending a message to Tibetan brothers and sisters inside Tibet that their voices are not lost and there is support for them. Yes.
And I'll add one more aspect that I overlooked a little bit there is all the issues that were just mentioned existed in the House too. It's not like the House didn't have to pay attention to Ukraine and Israel and Palestine and the budget and all these other long lists that we could talk about. And they still managed to get the bill through because they can walk and chew gum at the same time. So the Senate should easily be able to do that as well.
So, Franz, if I might add on that, you've joined ICT in the last 2 years. So you're working on Tibet issue and you're working in Congress. You've worked in Congress on other issues. So how do you see the support for Tibet in Congress? How would you describe it?
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. I don't want to, say anything too much about past work and support on it, but I can definitely attest that the bipartisan nature is off the charts. And one aspect that really stands out is it's not just support; it's goodwill and commitment. Right? There's not a lot of internecine political warfare around this bill as there is around a lot of other things. It's much more about time and some of the other issues that we've talked about, but it's that sense of commitment and goodwill. And there's not a lot. You go into meetings and there's not resistance. There's a desire to help and do something.
Thank you. Yes, we are getting some more questions. So thank you both. And thanks again to everybody who is taking part in this live. So I have a comment here, first of all, that I'd like to share from one of our viewers. This is from Sithar Tenzing La. Sithar Tenzing La writes, "First, we would like to thank you, all the Tibet supporters. We are all shaken by the news of Derge in Tibet. Thank you to ICT for your tireless efforts. And thank you, Sithar Tenzing La, not just for this question, but also for all of your tireless efforts and your support for the Tibet movement. We're all part of one large community of compassion. So thank you for being part of this with us." I would also like to share here another question that we received. This is a little bit off the topic of the Resolve. This is off the topic of the Resolve Tibet Act, but I'll just share this here because this is something that people are obviously concerned about. This is from Tenzin Andritsong, who writes, "Good afternoon, all, and Tashi Delay from New York." Tashi Delay to you as well. "I'm so sad and angry at what's happening in Kham Derge. I feel so frustrated and helpless watching the Tibetan monks and lay people just kneeling and pleading with the Chinese authorities. This morning, I saw another video of Chinese soldiers inside one of the monasteries. what immediate steps or measures can be taken to indefinitely halt this project? And I know that's a difficult subject, and it's something that we all would obviously love to see, but I'll throw that out there to the two of you as well.
Yeah, I think these images that we are seeing, it just shows to how difficult and the situation inside Tibet is. I mean, we just saw Freedom House report this morning. Freedom House has tiered Tibet as one of the least free countries in the world, again at an index rate of 0, which is lower than what it was last year. So this just goes to show that Xi Jinping's rule inside Tibet has taken things from bad to worse, and the strict surveillance and measures, including the colonial boarding school system, the monastic communities, the relocation, these dammings, all of these go to show how bad the situation inside Tibet. So I think all of our efforts towards raising this issue at every level that we can is important. But at the same time, China also today, when you look at China, governments dealing with China is different today than it was 10 years ago. So there is space for more, to push for more action on these issues and to build awareness about it.
I couldn't agree more. And to your point of the more international awareness that's going on, not just of what's happening in Tibet, but the essentially adversarial nature of Xi Jinping's regime. And there's a fine line to walk, and we understand that of our leadership, of our leaders, but it's not that fine a line. What's happening inside Tibet and other parts of China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, East Turkestan is undeniable. We see, the Tibetan community, our viewership, they know these things, but it's important to remind, if you can reach out to your local press, if you can talk to your district offices, express yourself in any way that you can, that what's being seen in these protests is because we're seeing it, right? This is not an exceptional circumstance, as you just listed off. It's just that this happens to be coming out, and the videos are very powerful. So I think it's important to remember that, and also on the, more positive way of looking at it, the China was just under scrutiny, and it's called the UPR. It's a complicated UN process, but it's important to recognize, and I think again motivating to see that the hard questions that countries asked China about Tibet increased twofold. So the focus on Tibet, despite some rhetoric, is not going down, it's going up, because the egregious actions that are taking place.
And brings us back to this Resolve Tibet bill that includes this piece on disinformation and countering disinformation,
right,
which goes to how we can use this after this bill is passed to work on countering disinformation.
Yes, thank you, Tensha. That is a great way to bring us back to the Resolve Tibet Act. And just to expound a little bit on what you both said, as troubling as what we've seen in Derge has been, obviously it is good that the world is paying some attention to this, that the video footage has gotten out. We have seen several top officials at the State Department comment on this issue and call for China to free the prisoners. So that is a positive development, a little bit of a silver lining that we can take. But like you said, Tensha, getting back to the Resolve Tibet Act, we have another question here from Tenzin Lodo. Tenzin Lodo writes, during Lobby Day, how should we advocate for or frame the Resolve Tibet Act differently among Democratic members versus Republican members, or do we just advocate for it the same way with both? And we'll have some more training and preparation for our Lobby Day participants as we get a little bit closer to the event. But Franz, maybe you can give us a little sneak preview of that.
Certainly. The simple answer is there's no distinction. I would, perhaps other issues face that, but Tibet doesn't. And we saw the bill pass with, again, enormous. People who want to can go look at the vote scores. I won't quote them off right now, but it was enormous, right? It's close to unanimous as you can get in the House. There's no different way to talk to any office about it. The only difference that I could recommend is speak from your experience, and when you're talking to members who represent your districts, you can speak in that way. And that's the only difference.
Thank you, Franz, and thank you, Tenzin Lodola, for that question. As we're kind of getting toward the end of the show, I do want to put out another call here for anybody who has any questions for Franz or for Tenzin about the Resolve Tibet Act. Please do share them in the comment section on our Facebook Live post, or email us at comments@savetibet.org. So, Tenzin, as we're kind of getting toward the end of the show, one aspect of this bill that I wanted to ask about is pushing for renewed negotiations, renewed dialogue between the Chinese government and the leaders of the Tibetan people. Could you talk a little bit more kind of historically about that dialogue process, what's happened so far, and how we're hoping to get that dialogue restarted?
Yes, so the dialogue between the Tibetan representatives and the Chinese side has been stalled since 2010. And following this, the Tibetan leadership still is committed to the middle way policy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which looks to find a negotiated solution for Tibet. And that's why this bill, what it does is, as Francis earlier explained, it pushes, it says between Tibet and China, there is a dispute that is unresolved, that needs resolution, and that the United States supports a resolution and with dialogue, with meaningful dialogue in this. So that's why this is important, because China says that there is no issue, that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. And what this bill also says, that the statement that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times is inaccurate. So in that sense, this bill touches upon and writes a number of issues that the Chinese use as their talking points for closing and not having dialogue. So it supports it in that way. That's why I think this is an important piece towards pushing for this dialogue, that ultimately this resolution has to come between the Tibetans and the Chinese. But what United States and other governments can do when they sit across the table with China is to try and bring this up and towards encouraging to come to a dialogue between the two countries.
Yeah, thank you both. So we are getting close to the end of the program here. So as we start to wrap up, I'll just put one more reminder out there. If anybody has any final questions, please do share them with us. If not, Tensho and Franz, I'd like to give you both an opportunity to say if there are any final words that you'd like to share with our audience.
To leave you with the last one. I just wanted to go back to two aspects of this that I think reiterate what Tensho is saying. In some ways, you could talk about this piece of legislation as a piece of a statement against disinformation. Right? We have the clause in it that's about propaganda. We have the piece about just needing to have dialogue that because it's still unresolved. Mm-hmm. But we have China saying that there's nothing to see here, right? The age-old pattern of an authoritarian state. Everything's fine, no worries. And then disputing directly the claim that it's always been part of China. So we know all those things are false. So they all fit together as knocking down the pegs, right, that hold up the Chinese Communist Party's lies.
Yeah. And this year, 2024, marks 65 years from 1959, which is the year when the Dalai Lama was forced to flee his homeland and begin a life in exile. So, being this 65-year commemoration, we feel we want to really work towards whatever we can to pull all our energy and resources into finding a way to push this bill forward. As Franz said, there are many. It's not without challenges, but at the same time, there is opportunity for the whole movement to come together, and it will really send a strong message to our Tibetan brothers and sisters inside Tibet that the Tibetan issue, that there is support for it and there is hope, and to send this message, we hope you will all join us in action, not only for those of you who coming here for Lobby Day. We look forward to see you here. And for everyone else, please join online for our actions. And thank you also for your support, because ICT as an organization wouldn't exist without the support of all our thousands of members around. So thank you all for your support, encouragement, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you, Tensho. Thank you, Franz. I think that's a good note to kind of wrap the program up on. I do want to share a few more comments kind of before we conclude the program. As Tensho mentioned, we did see the news earlier today that Freedom House now has given Tibet a total global freedom score of 0. Tibet's global freedom score is 0 out of 100. So that gives you an impression of just how bad the situation there continues to be. We will have some more information about that report on our website and our social media channels later today, so please do check that out. And also, to get back to the topic of this discussion with the Resolve Tibet Act, so as we mentioned, we'll have our Lobby Day. If you can't come to the Lobby Day, there are other opportunities to take part virtually. We also highly encourage people to reach out to their legislative offices directly and speak to them about the importance of passing this bill. But I also want to say that we do have a petition, an online petition, for you to contact your senators directly and send them your message telling them that you want them to co-sponsor the Resolve Tibet Act. So the URL to do that is www.savetibet.org/resolve-Tibet. Again, that's www.savetibet.org/resolve-Tibet. So please go there after this program, sign our petition, contact your members of the Senate, and please stay involved with us in this effort to pass the Resolve Tibet Act. So we have no more questions from our audience, but I do just want to share a couple last comments here from a few folks. Saring Lundup writes, Tibetans inside and outside are grateful to you all. Despite so much debilitating news coming from Tibet, we can occasionally take a sigh of relief that something so important is happening for Tibet. That's absolutely right. Strengthens our belief in democracy. So thank you for that comment. And one last one here from Derek Shakapa. Thank you for this summary and update with recommended actions to help pass this important piece of U.S. legislation for the Tibetan people. Free Tibet. And with that, we will wrap up the program. Thank you all for your questions throughout this episode of Tibet Talks. Thank you for joining us live, and thank you to all of you who will listen or watch this later. We will be back soon with another episode of Tibet Talks, but as we always say in the show, stay safe, stay well, and stay active. Thank you, and Tujiche.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Franz.
Thank you.